This episode was due to be talking about Brian Anderson and whether Brian Anderson is a everyday player at third base. However, I'm just about to hit record. Craig Mish drops the news. The Marlins have a new manager. Skip, Schumaker, who knows? But Skip is in as skipper for the Marlins. And we're going to dig into that breaking news on today's episode.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins. This is your daily Marlins podcast with me, Peter Pratt. Of course, follow me on Twitter at Miami Marlins _UK. Subscribe to the pod. They are free and available everywhere, wherever you get your pods. It's a daily show. If you are watching, hello. If you aren't, there is a YouTube channel. Hit subscribe there. Flick over to there. If you like the video version, if you're happy with audio, podcast's still good for you then. Guys, it is the Tuesday episode. I've been doing a ton of research about Brian Anderson, digging into that, thinking about Brian Anderson as an everyday player, perhaps for the Miami Marlins in 2023. I think it's one of the biggest decisions maybe the Marlins have to make, particularly in terms of the current roster and decisions. However, I was literally sitting here about to hit record, ready to rock and roll, check Twitter just one last time before I hopped on. Craig Mish, breaking news, the Miami Marlins are hiring Skip Schumaker as the next Marlins manager. Big news. Skip is in. And, well, let's be totally honest. I love it. Said the other day, I'm all in on Skip Schumaker. All in. Not only does he look the part, not only can he argue balls and strikes with the best of them, give those umpires hell, which is what we want to see. Young guy, big opportunity, and like the Marlins have done the business now. Skip Schumaker in as Marlins manager. Very intriguing hire. The reality is pretty kind of limited, I guess, coaching experience in some ways, but he's been with some clubs, some good clubs, Padres, Cardinals. What we did see from the Cardinals fans and Cardinals Twitter is we don't want to lose Skip. That's always a good sign. Did get the sense that maybe the Marlins were going in a direction. Then it seemed like they shifted gears. Skip, like I said last week, to me felt like was going to be the guy. I felt like just the kind of way things were trending and playing out, the White Sox sniffing around Espada. I couldn't pronounce the guy's name from the Rays, so we had to rule him out. Luis Rojas, as we talked about yesterday, not a chance. No way, Luis Rojas. Too many raccoons in the tunnel. The Marlins have settled on Skip Schumaker. Looking forward to his, introduction. Hopefully it's via Zoom, and hopefully get on to that that presser. Hopefully when he's introduced. Very intrigued to hear from him. I don't know a ton about him at this point. I'm sure others will, but the news there has dropped. The Marlins have their manager. They were one day behind the UK in announcing their prime minister. Not too bad. Not too bad for the fish. That is going to be a topic that we're going to dig into in more detail. But for me, my initial snap reaction is I felt like this was coming. I'm happy with this on the face of it. I'm very intrigued to see the way things play out. Young guy, given a shot, given a chance to build something. But as we've talked about many times, this Marlins offseason is huge. The window is opening. I'm very intrigued to see how it plays out. I guess the initial feedback or thoughts are what's it going to mean for the staff? And clearly the one question that everyone has got in their minds, what about Mel Stottlemyre Jr.? Craig Mish has been reporting as well on that one, or opinion maybe, rather than reporting, but opinion that he believes Mel will stay. I hope that's the case, clearly. I think that's probably the end of the road. Get a chance to bring in his dudes, and we'll see where we go. Going to dig into that. Loads more over the next couple of days and weeks as we start to get more information and dig into it. But the Marlins have their guy, Skip Schumaker. He is in. Have we got a pronunciation on that yet, by the way? I still don't know. So That's 5 minutes done of the episode already. And but I do want to talk about Brian Anderson because I have done the research, kind of, and I've been looking at Brian Anderson in more detail. Like I said, it's for me, it's a really intriguing decision. It's final year of arbitration for Brian Anderson, and projected between 6 million, 6.5 million, and that's the first question for the Fish. Are they comfortable with the number for Brian Anderson? Do they want to get creative? Do they see him as part of the organization moving forwards? So let's start there with Brian Anderson's injury history, production, but also his versatility, age. I, I mean, I'd be shocked if the Marlins just discarded him and non-tendered him, perhaps in the way maybe some of the other guys were treated historically. Going to being non-tendered and traded and et cetera, et cetera. I think when I sit back and dwell, I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if that's the way they go, because there's still value in Brian Anderson. Like, I know the injuries really hampered him last year, and they hampered him the year before, and I think that's at the heart of things. That Brian Anderson, in the past 2 seasons, 3 seasons, he obviously had a full year in 2020. He was a big part of the COVID run. Played pretty much every day. I think he played 59 of the 60 games. Brian Anderson, one of the one guys that didn't get COVID during the outbreak, and but around that, it's been tricky for him to stay on the field, and I think that's really impacted him. But when we look at his, what did Brian Anderson do in 2022? Let's start there, because you may not have looked at the numbers for a while. Overall, you go to the WAR number and you go, what was his WAR? It was 0.3. So 0.3 WAR, a positive WAR. So applying that to, just let's start there. He played, half a season effectively, because he was out on the IL 3 times. So with that, he's probably a 1 WAR dude if he plays the whole season. He's worth that money, the 6-7 million. That's fine. And there's no need to discard that. The versatility, the ability at third base. Yes, there was a couple of wrinkles and a couple of problems. The ability to play out in the outfield and, particularly right field with that arm. I think the Marlins, I think they'd be foolish to really just dump Brian Anderson for nothing. Yes, they may want to go in a different direction at third base, but let's be honest about it. I'm not convinced that there's an obvious pretender right now. Obviously, Jordan Gross had a decent look, let's say, played a bit there too. These are high risk strategies here for the Marlins. I think with Brian Anderson, there's a degree of history. Like, you kind of know what you're getting with BA. If you look at his career, so let's kind of wrap up last season. 8 home runs, not enough, by the way, from 8 bombs, and he hit a straight up 222. So hitting 222, his career batting average is 256. So there's a drop off there. Like, clearly there was. But when you kind of dig into it a little bit more, the splits are interesting for BA, where he started the year hot. Like, that's the funny thing. He started the year hot. Like April and May, he was hitting well, hitting kind of 265, 270. Then the injuries kicked in, and then once he come back from injury, his numbers in August and September not good. In August, he pretty much half a month's worth of play, hit 169. September, he was playing every day, pretty much in the outfield, hitting 218. Not good enough. Absolutely not good enough. An OPS of 611 in September, where other guys like a Brian De La Cruz were absolutely embracing it and they were absolutely tearing it up. And you're going, hey, it's September numbers. You shouldn't believe them. Well, Brian Anderson's numbers absolutely cratered in September. Yes, I think we all have to acknowledge that it's likely linked to the shoulder issues that he's had. And I guess that's at the heart of it for the Marlins. Do they believe that Brian Anderson can come back healthy and contribute? If he can, he's worth keeping around for 1 more year. I do actually think there's a kind of buy low situation here with BA, where he's young enough, he's been around, he's proven it at times, that he can be at least an average major league level player. And, in some cases, we were thinking he could be an above average dude. And maybe this is an opportunity for them to kind of sneak in a little, arbitration plus team option, maybe team friendly team option, something. I think that is interesting to see. It wouldn't shock me if they go down that path. I think I've talked about that before. Where you end up with like a a 1 year plus an option, or 1 year plus two options, something like that. I think the Marlins, the flexibility could be interesting for them. From Brian Anderson's perspective, maybe he's just happy to go to free agency and maybe a fresh start elsewhere. I don't know. I don't know where BA's head's at on that one. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into some of the numbers, some of the things that I've, and also some comps. The funny thing is like you kind of look at the NL East and there's a couple of comps. There's one comp in particular that is, I mean, you go to Baseball Savant and it's like, mirror images almost. So we're going to get into that very shortly. Before we do that, it's time to let you guys know about our good friends over at Bet Online, and is your number one source for betting, football, and the start of the new basketball season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every single game. And as always, Bet Online, it remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It is truly the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events. It includes Major League Baseball, of course, MMA, boxing, and golf. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online where the game starts. And where are we going to start with some numbers for Brian Anderson? That is the question. And here's the first one I wanted to dig into specifically. And it's funny, the batting order splits. So you kind of dig around into some of these splits. Like I mentioned, he started hot, definitely tailed off and the injuries, I think, impacted it. So let's call that out. If BA's healthy, he's all good. The splits is interesting because you look just the amount of, he didn't lead off, but he was hitting second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, all up and down the lineup. It's something I called out earlier in the year. The fact that the best teams, their lineup is pretty much fixed. Like, where Austin Riley's hitting, and where Frankie Lindor's hitting. And okay, Brian Anderson, I guess, isn't Austin Riley at this point and Frankie Lindor. I appreciate that. However, like, the mixing and matching it's always seemed in Donnie's world, it just seemed a bit excessive. Like, just having some sort of consistency and you can get into a groove. And I think this then spills over where I go and look and I think about the Marlins last year. A lot of teams, actually, but the Marlins offense obviously really struggling to put up some runs. Brian Anderson, what kind of guy is he? And when we think of Brian Anderson, historically, I always thought good hitter, contact hitter, can take a walk, hits the ball hard, has the ability to hit to all fields from a power perspective, and can drive in runs. It's kind of what I think about with Brian Anderson. However, I scrolled down into his splits when there's a runner in scoring position. And this was disappointing, I would say. He ends up hitting with runners in scoring. He did have 16 RBIs in total, but he only hit 173 and an OPS of 542. It's not good enough. That is not good enough for a guy that is hitting. I mean, he's hitting it all up and down the lineup again, going back to that point. But for that kind of guy, he's pretty frequently. And Brian Anderson last year was way below average in terms of, and for the type of hitter he is, it's disappointing. I think that's the main problem that I was seeing for Brian Anderson last year. So struggling to drive in these runners, hitting all up and down the lineup. The injuries impacted him. His arm is unquestioned. So when you go and look at Baseball Savant, his arm strength, he is like the top 1%. And it's funny, his profile overall in Baseball Savant, max exit velocity way up there, hard hit percentage, barrel percentage, walk percentage, all, average to above average in many ways, which is good. The problem with BA last year, the batting average, or the expected batting average, way down, the K percentage way down but up, if you know what I mean, and whiff percentage. Chase was okay. And so really with BA, it was just a lot of swing and miss and a lot of strikeouts in comparison to historical numbers for him. A lot of strikeouts, but not to the benefit of the power. His game maybe has changed. I think back to that 2019 season, 20 home runs. It was curtailed. 20 home runs for BA. And we've never seen that really come back with a great deal of consistency. And he's now become more of a kind of gap hitter, let's say, more of a kind of opposite field gap hitter in some ways, which is fine in many ways. And I think he can still do a job. I do. I'm intrigued to see whether the Marlins still believe in him at third base positionally. Like, let's think back. We never had any qualms about Brian Anderson at third base at all. But these couple of shoulder injuries, neither of them, I don't believe, have been from fielding. They've been running the bases, if I recall correctly. I know certainly the first one last season was, but the Marlins then protected him last year, put him out into the outfield to try and preserve the shoulder a little bit. And, for me, the Marlins have got a ton of outfielders already. I don't think, if indeed they don't see a future for Brian Anderson at third base, then I think they probably do need to cut bait there and look to move on. But I still feel like a healthy spring comeback, Brian Anderson, shoulders fine. You just got to manage the workload there and try and protect himself a little bit. But I do think there is a player there. And when I look across the NL East, it's funny. You go and start like looking and comparing guys. There's no point looking at Austin Riley because it's just insane. But when you go and look at the Mets, Eduardo Escobar, go and have a look at his Baseball Savant page. It's effectively looking in the mirror. Like it really is. The difference for Escobar really was that there was just more power overall. I think he ended up with 20 home runs last year versus Brian Anderson's 8. But if Brian Anderson plays the full year, you project out 20. Like the question I've got is if Brian Anderson hits 20 home runs and plays above average defense again at third base and maybe hits between 240 and 250 like he's done historically, would you be happy? Should Brian Anderson be an everyday third base player if indeed that is to be the level of production? And I think yes, is good enough for the Mets. It should be good. I mean, the Mets, Escobar played pretty much every day there at third base. The Mets won 100 and something games, 101 games. Like that production from Brian Anderson, there is no problem with that. I think as a fan base, we've maybe got some Brian Anderson fatigue and we're looking for a change, something new. I'm not convinced that the change in something new in Jordan Groshans or Charles LeBlanc is quite the level of change that's going to move the needle, to be honest with you. And, who's out there? What other options do the Marlins have perhaps at third base? I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. It's been a little bit of a trouble spot for us in general the last couple of years. Always kind of talk about, third base, not quite clear. Don't really have tons of power hitters knocking around at third. Obviously, they've drafted Jacob Berry, but there's not a chance in hell Jacob Berry's carrying on and playing third base at the major league level. Just not a chance in hell. Like he's DHing or first basing or something, which is fine if the bat plays. We don't mind that. You look at then Alec Bohm, for example, and see what what his Savant page looks like, which is interesting. Bohm, hasn't had the home run production either. Like Escobar, 20 home runs. I think Alec Bohm, let's say 12, I think it was. But Bohm's then gone more the other way from where Brian Anderson was, early in his career. High contact, high batting average, hard hit, high batting average guy with the ability to hit a home run. And Bohm's kind of gone down that pathway, whereas Brian Anderson, it feels like, has looked to try and increase the power. It hasn't worked. The strikeouts there a lot more, but the injuries fundamentally are hindering BA. Really are. So where does that leave us at third? If it was me, what's my call? I'm paying BA in arbitration. I'm keeping him around for this year. I mean, there's a ton of guys around that can play third. We've obviously got Wendell, Birdie, Groshans, LeBlanc, other dudes. Miggy Rowe can even play over there, I guess. He's played at third before. So there's tons of options. The questions the Marlins have to ask themselves, can Brian Anderson's shoulder hold up at third base? Can the shoulder hold up now from a hitting perspective for a full year? If the answer to either of those questions is no, then they need to look to move on from Brian Anderson immediately, because we've seen what happens if the shoulder isn't there. It's he's out in the outfield and the offense just drops off. So slightly curtailed Brian Anderson because we had 5 minutes with the new skipper coming in. But that's going to wrap us up for today's episode of Locked On Marlins. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day and joining me again. It's Tuesday's episode. I'm back tomorrow, Wednesday, another guy. I've been teasing out Sean Barrett and Garrett Cooper for about a week and a half, it feels like. Sean's now on his holidays. so unavailable for the next few days. He'll be back next week. I'm going to cycle into another Marlins infielder and ask the same question. Can they be an everyday third baseman? An everyday player for the Marlins? Final summary on BA. I think he can be if the shoulder's right. If the shoulder isn't right, then the Marlins need to move on. With that being said, see you guys tomorrow.